Hello, and welcome to today's seminar. This is the last in a series of 3 seminars that we've done with RS Components, and they've been absolutely brilliant so far, and we're in for a great one today as well. We've got a really great lineup. So we're looking at data and what data can do to enhance and help your supply chain. So I'll be having a quick chat with Debbie Bowring shortly, and then we'll go on to our panel discussion. So if you've missed any of the seminars, don't worry. So everyone who's registered today will be emailing them with the links to our previous ones, and we've had a couple of great ones on one on sustainability and one on what the CEO and senior management are really looking for from procurement as well. So we had some really great lineup speakers on those too. So don't worry, you can go back and watch them all on demand later. So really, I want to have a massive thank you to RS for helping us pull all of these together. Like I say, that we've had some great insights. RS have supported us for many years now, and they've got some fabulous reports and insights, and I'll post the link on the chat in a bit, on the MRO space. So make sure you go and download some of those and get some great best practice. Easy for me to say. Talking of the chat, make sure you use the chat today to network with other people that are on this seminar with us, and also to post your questions to the panel. But not only that, add your comments, tell us whether you agree or disagree with any of the comments or examples you've seen. So we're trying to make this session as interactive for you all as possible. So we shall get started in just one sec. So I will be joined first of all by Debbie Bowring, who I said, like I say, is president of IESA. They're part of the same group as RS Components. They all come under the Electro Components group. So Debbie's joining us today as our expert. And IESA, they're market leader in procurement and management of indirect materials. So thanks, Debbie, for joining us today.
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you for having me, Emma.
You are more than welcome. So data. Well, no, let's start by you telling us a little bit about your role and what you do at IESA, and then we'll, sorry, I was jumping into the questions a bit too quickly then. So let me just introduce yourself and your role a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everybody. So I'm Debbie Bowring. I'm the president of IESA. And as Emma said, that's part of the Electro Components group and a sister company to RS Components. Now, IESA offer what we call integrated solutions to manufacturing clients. We're based in the UK and we operate right across Europe and indeed quite recently globally. And we manage indirect engineering spend in order to help our manufacturing clients keep their production lines running. So critical activities. Our solution, therefore, includes the management of their inventory, the procurement of all of their indirect products, and the transaction processing that goes around that. So a lot of consolidation and efficiencies we like to add to our clients' operations. And therefore, we're trusted by our clients to make the right decision, deliver savings and real value to our clients' bottom line. Hopefully that's a short enough intro to give people an insight about what we do.
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks. So, I mean, now more than ever, I guess it is so important for us to get a handle on data and on good data in our supply chain. Getting the right data is one thing, but then it's interpreting it too. What are your thoughts on any of that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge opportunity for most organisations, isn't it, data and how we use that. So I think it's critical, you know, that we get a handle on data, and analysing data, let's be honest, is the bread and butter of all the procurement professionals. You know, the ability to work with large sets of multiple data and draw those comparisons in order to understand and establish where we are, in what position, is critical. You know, so extracting data, cleansing data, organising data are the basics, and of course that's critical. However, we think it's, you know, it's really about how we use that data, how we use that information, and how we interpret it, how we present it, and how we, you know, how we understand what it's telling us is what drives the real value into any organisation. So enabling organisations to make the right business decisions and take the right direction. And it's about, therefore, what the organisation does with that information as a result of having it. And as we know from the recent CIPS and RS direct procurement surveys, companies struggle with the pure basics of that. You know, only 40% of companies are able to say they understand where they are right now, and only 50% are able to track those actions that they're putting in place in order to deliver, say, annualized savings on a day-to-day basis. So it's clear that, you know, still organizations are struggling with some of the basic information and having the visibility of spend and how they track savings that they're trying to deliver. So
No, absolutely. Do you think procurement people have got the right skills to get a handle on this? I mean, you know, it's not necessarily a new thing for us to be interpreting data, but I guess we're looking at data in all sorts of new places, perhaps. Do you think we've got the right skills?
It's valuable, isn't it? Data and information is the real core value to so many organisations. And I think that some of the skills I articulated before, Emma, are the minimum set of skills that are now required. So it's really about how we therefore interpret data and how we present that, how we present the story of what it's telling us, the ideas of where that's coming from, how we help the organisation to set that vision of where real impact can be made. So there's a mix, I think, of additional skills and qualities that are coming into play. So interpretation of data is a very specialised skill, and you know, interpreting what has that data actually telling us, and how do we create that vision to move the organisation forward and impact the direction. So using information from analysed data in a very engaging manner. So, you know, how do you take the organisation through that change and, you know, to interact and get actions from skill set? You know, that's a skill set that's really required. So, you know, how do you tell the story? It's about storytelling in the first instance with the valuable information you've got. And then, of course, when you've done that, how do you use those soft leadership skills to engage those teams and build relationships? You know, it's not always natural, and drive that momentum, drive that movement, and help the organisation to understand how they really measure and drive valuable measures. So I think there is some new skills that organisations are looking for now in terms of storytelling and engagement of teams.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on there with that storytelling. It's what you don't really want is just to circulate a load of data in reports and hope that someone can make some sense of it. And that, I guess that's our job there, really, to make that sense of it and to use the language of the business to make sure that they can see where the connections are. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Are we in danger of being swamped in data and not really knowing what to do with it?
Of course. Every day a new source of data, a new social media or something else is telling us. So, you know, which is why I think, you know, we've all got to think about the structure and the disciplined approach that we take. So, you know, there's so many sources, and like I say, a new one every day, but it's about, you know, really undermining where are the reliable sources of information, establish the baselines, and, you know, where are we trying to get to, and prioritising what we're trying to accomplish as a business, because there's so much that organisations can do. So, you know, as an organisation, we have loads of great sources of innovation and great ideas and opportunities, but we have to constantly challenge and say, what are we trying to achieve? What do we know? What are we trying to achieve? And what's the outcome we want to get from what we're going to undertake? So it's about prioritising, really, and applying a very focused and disciplined approach, I think.
And have you got examples of that in your own organisation where you've used some data and improved efficiencies?
Yes. Yeah, we for efficiencies, Emma, or for how we prioritise, or you want deliverable efficiencies?
Yeah,
no problem. Well, if you think about, we're working in manufacturing, so where clients are very different environments, as you can imagine, and where you have a high hygiene environment. So where you'll find that is maybe pharmaceutical or food production or laboratories. And very often that means that they're completely, I know a lot of people wear PPE these days, but they are very much gowned up, and you know, they have to gown up before they enter the area and then de-gown when they come out of the area. So working with, well, what are the products that you need in that area and what are you likely to need? We analysed what are the things that you're going to need when going in and out of there. And then how much does it cost for operatives to move between the areas to get what they need? And what does that cost the business? So there's two sets of data there. There's what are the parts they're going to require when they're in there regularly, and how much does it cost for an operative to leave the area and go back into the area? And by analysing those sort of results and comparing that data, we found that a couple of £100,000 for one particular production line a year was spent in wasted time. So moving those products right near to that production line saved them an awful lot of money. So that's the kind of power that data can drive, and efficiency.
Excellent. And the PPE example is a great example at the moment about just having the that data, real-time data at your fingertips on something that, you know, we talked about emergency circumstances in some of these during the crisis. So I guess having that data for the specific areas that you need it for as fast as possible in real time is critical.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to take, if you like, process data with procurement data, spend data, and put the two together and actually achieve something far bigger than just saving money on parts, if you like.
Exactly, pulling that whole picture together. Yeah, brilliant. Debbie, great. Thank you very much for that.
No problem.
We're going to now introduce, I'm going to hand over to Kerry Jones, who is editor of Supply Management Magazine. And Kerry is going to introduce our panel and ask them questions. So please, like I said, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end to ask the panelists some questions from you guys. And also just feel free to add your comments, etc. Let's keep this as interactive as we possibly can. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Kerry and I'll pop back at the end. Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, Emma, and Debbie as well, actually. So I think we've got a really good basis opening up the topic there. And so we're going to expand and dive into some of those questions a little bit more in the panel. So yeah, Debbie is going to be rejoining us. Thank you very much. We also have with us David Medori, CPO at William Hill, Jim Townsend, CPO at Walgreens Boots Alliance, and Sarah Hamilton, Deputy Commercial Director at HMRC. So thank you all. If you could join us, that would be wonderful. Thanks for coming. So yeah, I think as we've kicked off the topic already with Debbie, if we can dive straight in to how do you actually go about finding the right system for you, for your business, for the type of data that you need to use, and then how you can manipulate that without needing to be an expert. But Sarah, how would you go about that at HMRC?
Thanks. It is quite a challenge. I think it all goes back to the point about what data do you want, how complex is your organisation, and also how much resource you have available. Because you could look outside and there are available systems, and when we came to look at what we wanted to do, it's very much a make versus buy situation. You can go out and there are a number of companies out there that do it all for you, and you can and will provide the information back. But what we found when we looked at it, we decided not to go to that model. We decided to take a position, an approach of a hybrid model. So we had our own ERP system, and we had also a source to contract. We actually use SAP Ariba, but there are others available, other brands available. And then what we did was we then decided to go, some of the data was generated and we bought the data in, and some of the data that we actually created ourselves. So it goes back to budget, complexity of your supply chain. Do you have the resource? Do you want to invest in the resource? Or do you want to take and buy another, go out to a third party? Whether you go out to a third party to actually collect some of the information for you, or you pay for that third party to actually consolidate all that information for you. As we say, on reflection, we decided to go to a hybrid model. So we buy some of the information in and some of the information that we manipulate ourselves or create ourselves. So we bring it together because we wanted, because our, from a perspective of being in the public sector, and also because we're very highly regulated, and also you wouldn't be surprised to note that some of the information comes from our own systems. So for example, on tax compliance, we would do all that ourselves in-house, so we have perhaps a better understanding of on certain risks. That's how we decided to approach it. But I think you have to ask your fundamental questions: complexity, what are you looking for, how much do you want to invest, and how much do you want as an overhead for in your organization? Because we did go and see people who could provide commercial intelligence, who would do that for us. We felt that actually having a smaller team of people to manipulate that data and buy in certain amounts of the different data sources was more appropriate. So I think it's that perspective.
Okay. So I guess that hybrid approach worked for you particularly, but what about for a different business? So David, at William Hill, you have quite a different approach, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah, we do. I mean, look, we do operate something similar to what Sarah was saying there. We do operate hybrid. We'll buy, but we'll also do our own data analysis internally. I mean, look, when we do then look to buy from third parties, because we're effectively a data-intensive technology business, and the differences around our area, we are regulated, but kind of a different regulation because of gambling. We have some quite tight know your customer regulations. They're called KYC checks. So the amount of data that's involved with that is all personal data to our customers. Could be age verification, address, those type of matches. So a lot of data there, and when effectively we have to use third parties. It's not something we can do internally for that. And then the other side of part of the regulation is around crime in our industry. So we have a lot of anti-money laundering checks that go on, and again, we have to use third parties for that. So we're effectively buying in a lot of data. So we've got a lot of considerations that around that data when we're sourcing it, what we do, what we need to do, and I can kind of elaborate in terms of some of the areas if you want me to on that.
Sure, yeah, that's fine. About sourcing, what the areas of sourcing data?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of sourcing it, really, I mean, we kind of have three stages. So we have one which is your normal financial due diligence, and that would be kind of, we'd use that for everything. But then when it comes to really the data, we've got a prescribed set of questions. Now, I'm not certainly going to remember them all off the top of my head for this seminar, but some of the typical questions would be, do the companies have the right level of information security certification, like 27001? Do they have a data protection officer? Have they implemented a data protection policy and procedure at the suppliers? Do they have a data breach process in place? Do they have the right firewalls in place for segregation of data? Has the data retention period been agreed with us, on their systems and servers? So there's kind of a raft of questions that we would ask, and effectively the suppliers would need to come out as green on all of those, otherwise we can't source them. The risk for us is just too great. And then finally, the last kind of barrier there is with legal, really. So the contracts, and we'll have specific data processing agreements in place. So that's kind of like a 3-stage process for us, but that's when we're sourcing from external sources.
Right. So I guess obviously those checks that you do help with that validation process, making sure you're getting exactly what you need. And as you said, both William Hill and HMRC are heavily regulated as well. So Sarah, is that ring true with how you approach it, and how do you actually go about buying data?
Well, we do. Yes, we buy data similar to what David's saying. So we would buy in credit data from certain people like D&B or Experian, would be that sort of information around or Graydon's, etc. There's numerous different companies that we would buy information on financial due diligence data. I think the key point, just going back, is and it goes back to is about what you do with the data, because quite often we found that when we were buying the data and we were we have a small team of people who put the data together, is actually keeping it in the moment, because quite often you get data comes through and it's, you're looking at credit reports, and with sometimes on some of our large programs, which we've been doing recently, which is on the locations program, where we have doing a large construction program across the UK. It wasn't necessarily what we found, just going back to the complexity, was how far down the supply chain do you go, and how do you find the information around different suppliers second, third, fourth, fifth tier down, and their solvency, etc. And also being very clear, because sometimes you can run a report, a credit check report, and it can be green and everything's fine. But the first time you know about it is you get a Google alert, or you get something in the local press, you know, that a small company has gone under, and that will cause problems for us, because if you've got a regional centre and you want to you have a certain timescales to get it launched, it's about being in the moment and actually understanding that data. And I think that's where it comes down to this point of, you can buy so many different sources of data in, and you can sometimes have too much data, and it's about how do you get that and use it and manipulate it in a way that is constantly you're identifying where the critical points are. And I think that's, you know, a problem that we all face, and I think one of the ways to do it is about, you know, proportionality, knowing how far you're going to go down, doing some risk analysis on that, and working out which are the areas that you need to concentrate on. Because if you have everything coming in, it's very difficult to see the needle in the haystack.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, that leads on very neatly to another question I had, which is when you do have that amount of data, obviously coming in from different areas, sometimes internal, external, and or even obviously big data, which ramps up again the amount that we're dealing with. How can you actually manipulate such large volumes without information overload, or actually getting less valuable insights because of how much you're dealing with? So how can you ensure that you are retaining that value?
Mm-hmm. And it's a problem. It is a problem, and I think we've all been caught out by small companies that we contract with, we don't realise are actually a risk. But how we do it is by we segment our contracts and our suppliers based on criticality, risk, and spend. We also not only segment the contracts, but we segment supply chains. So I refer back to, you know, the point I was saying about the regional centres, and actually creating and mapping supply chains within that for delivery. Mm-hmm. From a tools perspective, one of the issues of having a hybrid system is you've got multiple different data flows coming in. How do you that's the benefit of somebody doing it for you when you do it by. So we tend to we use we tend to use Power BI. We have they're easier to create, they're non-techy. So that we create dashboards, and that's how we get those feeds in, that live feeds in to pick it out, and we based on the segmentation and the categorization of the contracts and the supply chain. But there's always a challenge about how far you go down, and sometimes so how far you go down the supply chain, and also which supply chain. So it goes back to the point is about buying data. You can we did investing in time to do some supply chain mapping and understanding with your suppliers down their line of who's in there. That's a very valuable activity to do, but that's how we do it. Yeah.
And so if I can just move over to Jim a moment. So I know that you've previously spoken about having very large projects on the go and having to incorporate data usage there. So again, thinking about large volumes of data, how can we go from having siloed systems where either our internal systems or the people that we are, our suppliers and other people that we're interacting with, how can we go from these multi little layers to a really full rounded view?
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I think the challenge that you outlined there is one that affects many companies. Most of us have lots of data, but actually really struggle to interpret what that's telling us. And it does tend to be very siloed, and it gives a one-dimensional view of a particular challenge. So, if I think about this, and you think about, say, an example where maybe a category manager working in, say, for example, the facilities management space, maybe they've got several thousand locations they're buying services for. And as they're figuring out their strategy in terms of how they want to structure their supply chain and what's the optimal approach for their particular organization, you know, they're considering factors such as how are suppliers performing, what are the cycle times to perform their work, what are the optimization opportunities, what does it cost, who are all the other players in the marketplace, how do you benchmark cost versus cycle time, what are all the CSR angles, you know, what's the footfall in all of these buildings, what do our people and customers care about, right down to information such as where's this property located, does it rain a lot, is it by a busy road, blah, blah, blah. And the list kind of goes on, and we want to look at all of this information and bring new insights. And the reality is, in most companies, most of that information, if it's codified in an appropriate way, actually sits in lots of different systems. And I think, you know, category managers probably spend way too much time assessing that data and then creating imperfect hypotheses based on what you could describe as their partial view of the world. And that's not through as a result of our lack of effort and focus. It's just really challenging to pull all of this together. Mm-hmm. And I think what we're seeing more and more of is organizations, and I guess in turn technology and technology companies in the sort of procure tech space are thinking about this problem differently, such that I think we've realized that we're no longer going to have one monolithic solution that kind of puts all this data in one place and it's all part of one integrated end-to-end system. What we actually have now is an emerging digital ecosphere where it enables us to take data from many different sources and to float that data on what you might describe as a data lake. And then that data lake is then interrogated by analytic tools, you know, enabling that kind of multi-source raw data to be analyzed and pull together new insights. So, you know, picking up on some of the narrative that Debbie was talking about a little bit earlier on in terms of building a storyboard based on, you know, also the category manager's role is about building a storyboard based on these insights rather than being a spreadsheet jockey, and this enables them to create a wow in the organization. This enables them to create moments above around the senior leadership team where they say, we never knew that, you bring real value. And those wow moments are what procurement people should be looking for as they create these new insights. Yeah, for sure, though, this requires material investment and a real will and an organizational belief that, you know, this is the right thing to do and this is the right thing to invest in. So, you know, ultimately, if we're going to make the difference, we have to kind of step away from being a function that pieces together lots of data to one that actually has access to that data and that analysis and then can make informed decisions.
So it sounds like developing a data lake and this quite enormous data sphere, as you said, does that make it easier to interrogate more effectively? Because it sounds like it sounds so much more complex. Is that a very different system to if you had a specific data program?
Yeah, so I think the thing is, the reality is, we have many point solutions that look at just individual pieces of data or individual dimensions to data, shall I say. But ultimately, to create new insights, one needs to bring that together and bring all of those dimensions together to create new insights and develop a viewpoint on new patterns within that. So I think this is where many organizations are going. And I think you know, many of the data programs that we have out there, which are very much point solutions, do a great job for that particular problem. Mm-hmm. The reality is, what we're trying to understand is not what that particular problem is. What we're trying to understand is what are the overall opportunities, and to do that, you have to have a much more rounded insight.
Okay, so so you mentioned it's very similar to what Debbie was talking about earlier. Can you give us an example of when you have used data to support such a you know, such a big project, or whether that's responsible practices or sustainability, like a big issue, and how data is actually being used to support that.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I guess from a sustainability perspective, so, you know, my organization, Walgreens Boots Alliance, we've got a huge CSR program. We were previously the United Nations Sustainability Company of the Year a couple of years ago. So it's really kind of key to us. So, I mean, you know, I think my take is where an organization needs to start on this kind of data journey is to figure out what's actually important to your customers and the communities that you serve. And I think that's kind of your start point. I think it's really important to understand that. So understand what that start point is, and then be clear about the commitments that you're making, and be clear about how you're actually going to measure on those commitments. So, for example, at Walgreens Boots Alliance, we've got obligations and commitments that we've made around our packaging being or outer packaging being plastic free by a certain point in time. We've made commitments around certifying that our supply chain for raw materials has the right level of traceability by a certain point in time. We've made commitments around diversity and inclusion in terms of our supply chain, in terms of our workforce and what have you. And we've absolutely got a clear view of what those goals are. But when you then get down to the next level and say, well, how do you then actually support that with information and data and analysis to enable you to develop your strategies to be able to execute on that, and then equally report on it? And I think it kind of goes back to what we've been discussing here. I think many organizations would say that when it comes to tier one, so your direct suppliers, your ability to be able to influence those and work together on common approaches and common solutions, and to be able to have access to clear, relatively unambiguous information is much greater at that. As soon as one gets below tier one, particularly in a very broad supply chain, that can be very challenging. I think for some supply chains, so if I think, for example, say the food supply chain, there are some great examples where many of the consumer goods companies have got some very good point solutions that enable them to drill down through their supply chain. But I think that the challenge that many of us face, and you know, it's really, really, really important that one of the challenges we face is that how do you get that visibility about the supply chain and how the supply chain's performing? You know, very clearly there is new technology out there which is starting to kind of enable greater visibility, but the reality is that's still some way off, I think. I think also the other area I would say very briefly is the whole area of risk. I think that's come on significantly in the last few years. And there's a whole lot of internet scraping tools out there. For example, if you're trying to understand the reputational risk within your supply base, one can use various internet scraping tools to understand what the news is saying about all of these different companies that you happen to be monitoring. I think they work very well. I think compared to where we were maybe 10, 15 years ago, I think we've made huge strides in that space. You know, so I guess my sort of summary is to your question, Kerry, is first tier relatively straightforward, second tier more challenging. The whole data play is rapidly evolving with the new procure tech which is around us, but the big challenge in all of that is that procure tech and how that fits together in one single ecosphere. Okay.
And so if I can come to you, Debbie, because you previously mentioned about similar of using data to improve efficiencies in your business area. Do you have any other examples, or could you expand on how one thing feeds into the other?
Okay, yeah, because okay, so we look at lots of different sets of data when we're providing a solution to clients. So it's not just the procurement data, that plays a very big part, because any business is going to be very interested in what procurement function can deliver to their business year on year. That's just a fact which we're all faced with. So, but what we try to do is mix it with alternative solutions, and that can range from productivity through to how you're operating, right through to mixing that with how do you buy in a different way? Is there different ways you wish to structure your business in order to recognise those efficiencies? And of course, how we're, the whole cost of procuring, the whole cost of onboarding suppliers, managing suppliers, managing the risk. So we use data right throughout our business to that's our whole business. So we have to be able to provide data to clients to say where we're adding value, whether it be to their procurement area in terms of how we're sourcing for them, how we're demonstrating that we are saving them money, how we're evaluating technical projects that swap products out to deliver, more efficiencies, how we buy, how we process transactions. So yeah, we're measuring every element, and we present that to them in a scorecard on a monthly basis. And it's also, we get back to storytelling, it's about, so what? That's what's expected. How are we going to add real value to the organisation? How, as somebody mentioned earlier, how are we going to tell them something that's really a wow? We didn't realise that, and now we can make them a different message. So we try to become a partner, because we've got to add value to an organisation, not just procure better, if you like. So we utilise that, and it's really what Jim covered earlier. Some of the tools, creating that data lake is exactly. And I think the one thing I would add to that is you asked about how it all sounds very complex. Well, actually, it's all making it, some of the tools that now are being deployed, and I believe that that's going to be, in the next 2 years, it's going to be a huge area for businesses to really think about. It does make it actually easier for procurement professionals, and like Jim mentioned, category managers, to stop wasting time on administration, which means they can turn their attention to what's it really telling me, and therefore what do we need to do. So I think those tools should hopefully in the future make it easier if businesses can invest in them.
Oh, great, thank you. It sounds like it's a very tech-heavy feature, that's for sure. So if I can come back to something that we touched on earlier, but we didn't really get into, the more data we add, especially in areas like where David and Sarah are working, it seems like we're introducing more opportunities for risk around data sharing and GDPR. So how do you protect your businesses from any of those risks, but also maybe use data for more responsible practices or monitoring what you're doing? David, if I can ask you about that first.
Okay. In terms of risk GDPR, providing we do all the checks and we cover all the due diligence that I mentioned earlier on, which is around our third-party assurance and risk basis. So this is kind of all the questions that we've got around this. We actually eliminate effectively the GDPR risk. So that's a mandatory requirement that we need to do internally, and that really does cover us off. I mean, look, you can't eliminate risk, but it massively minimises it for us. Then I think your second question around what was the second question? Could you just mention that again?
Monitoring responsible uses of that data.
Yeah, I mean, monitoring. I mean, trying to use data for responsible practices, which I think the question is. I mean, we use data internally that we manipulate ourselves, that we create. I think Jim mentioned, I think he was mentioning something around that in terms of we do our own kind of scraping, but it's quite, I'd say probably quite basic at the moment, and we can't cover everything. So we are introducing a new tool. We did in the third quarter last year, and that's linked to our full supply base, and it effectively links to databases externally, be it governmental, law enforcement, and financial. And effectively what we're looking for in terms of responsibility is being a PLC is modern slavery, sanctions, politically exposed persons because of our industry, and effectively AML, anti-money laundering again. And we get a lot of triggers and alerts that come to us on an automated feed around that, which is something that we can't really do. Well, it's a lot more efficient in terms of timing, or we'd have to have a bigger team to do that. So, so we use that for the responsible practices which you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So is that like a separate discipline, or is that just part of how your data management and procurement teams run together?
No, not really. It's just part of the procurement process now. You know, in terms of how we've been set up, how I've set the team up to go forward to give us more assurity there. Because I guess if you probably went back, whether it's our business or other competitors of ours, we've had fines in the past because we've not been as strong around this area. So we've just had to beef it up really in terms of that and utilise data to support that. So, so we're protected as much as we can, and ultimately, in terms of responsibility, we're protecting our customers. That's what that's one of our main aims: responsibility in terms of the game in there, which is really one of the core competencies of what we do.
And then, would that be very similar to your side, Sarah?
Yes, I mean, obviously being in the public sector and public, and the way that we go through the pre-procurement and the procurement checks, etc. A lot of this information, and we are checking that and making sure that everything is covered before we contract. But then we continue those activities right through in life. And we invest. I mean, my role, I have a dedicated team of people in commercial who manage the contracts in life. And part of those checks is checking around corporate social responsibility, modern slavery. It goes right through. It's a big focus for us. I mean, on GDPR, obviously, as everybody else, that's covered in the contracting stage. But we also did and invested a lot of time, getting all our contracts up to date, to the deadlines a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's a big focus for us, and we are, different. We're different in the public sector, is in the sense that we're answerable to everyone across the public. We're here to do a public service. So we get not only in addition to the checks, we are answerable. We're answerable through to Parliament, and also through freedom of information requests. So we do a lot of investment in government to make sure that we are ethically, the ethical requirements are covered. That is a big, heavy investment in that area.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shift over to some Q&A questions, because it's very relevant to what we're talking about, and I'm seeing a lot of questions come in. So I'm going to continue this conversation. David, something's come in specifically about what you were just talking about. So when you're talking about checks and performing checks on suppliers, and Sarah's same thing as well, how do you actually continue that down along the chain? So are you only, do you only apply those checks to where you're buying data, or can you actually, is it possible to continue that along their supply chain?
Could I answer the question?
Absolutely, please do.
So we do checks on our what we call the tier one, our prime suppliers, but we also go down supply chains. We can't go down every supply chain, so it's all about proportionality and risk, and it also depends on the services they provide. So if the supply chain is a sensitive supply chain, we will go down the supply chain and go down into the third tier. It depends on the services that we are procuring.
And just to touch on that, so absolutely the first tier suppliers, and then part of our risk assurance questions, we do ask specific questions in terms of the second tier suppliers. But do we go into the level of detail that we do in tier one? No, we don't. is the frank answer. And I think it's just a bigger challenge, you know, in terms of the resources that we've got available to us, and then the proportionality to risk as well. So you can check everything to the nth degree, but what is that ultimate risk, you know, as well. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
So
Yeah,
sorry, Jim.
I was going to say, I'd just add to the points that David and Sarah have made there. You know, I think it's absolutely about that proportionality piece. We're an organisation that operates in 25 different companies. We've got a huge supply chain spend, many billions of dollars. And the reality is, when you operate in that company, you've got tens of thousands of suppliers that you interact with. And I think segmenting that supply chain and knowing where the risk is, knowing who your strategic, critical, major, and shall we say more transactional relationships are, is really important. And that's kind of what we use to kind of focus our effort. And the level of focus that we put on those real kind of key partners versus those which are much more transactional is completely different, you know. And we set up our systems, we set up our supplier onboarding, you know, to all focus on what's really important versus what's the trivial.
Okay, so it makes it a lot easier for you to actually completely monitor those rather than trying to do everything for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one can't get their arms around every supplier and every sub-tier within that supply network. What you can possibly do is figure out, you know, of all of those suppliers, which are the 100, 200, 300 companies that will make a material difference to how we perform, and how do we mitigate the risk with those companies. Okay.
Okay. So I've got a good one here saying, so in the panel's experience, do you separate data analysis and procurement professionals, or are you seeing more of emerging these types of skills?
I'll make a comment on that. So the terms of there is a bit of a separation. So I have data analysis in my team, but they're not a procurement professional. They are data analysis. That's what they do. You know, so it is a different skill set. But saying that everyone in the team has got data analysis skills. So I'm not going to, you know, say anything other than that. But the people that are responsible for really the data analysis, doing the reports, dashboards, sending the data out, but in a really relevant form, you know, they're really quick at it, very fast. And that's their core job. So it is different, and I wouldn't see a procurement person doing that as their kind of their day-to-day job, because that's not then what I'm implying them to do, their category management on and negotiation. So it's interrelated but slightly different. Yeah,
I guess everyone's expected to have a base level knowledge of a lot of different things at the moment, and you can't be an expert in everything. So what about the relationship? Oh, sorry, Jim.
Sorry, Karen, I was just going to add to David's point, and I think it's a changing position, and you know, each company will have its own approach for sure. Within our organisation, we expect our category teams and what have you to have some base analytical skills, and for many of their day-to-day challenges, they'll perform that analysis themselves. And then we have a small team which is in part outsourced in terms of performing the super heavy duty analytics. But as I was talking about, and the rest of the panel have been talking about, you know, that's a changing picture. I think we're going to get to a point in due course where all that heavy lifting actually gets much easier, and the systems and the tools that we have around us will make it much easier to assess the information and to draw conclusions about it. So I think it's probably gone from being largely led by the category team to where many organizations are having specialists to do that. I think in the future that could well change, you know, as the tools sort of the new tools start to come online.
So do you think, obviously, depending on your organization, as you were saying, it's very much about what you need and what you're trying to achieve. Do you think there'll be a stronger relationship in future between, say, a CPO and a chief data officer, and those at that level?
Yeah, inevitably. I really do believe that, because I really do believe the landscape of procurement will be shaped by the insights that we're able to provide to the businesses and the organisations and the customers that we kind of serve. So, you know, this will be where we bring value in the future, and this is a whole space that we should all be kind of focusing on. Would be my take.
So I have a specific question here for Debbie. So have you noticed any change in perception about MRO procurement because of recent supply chain challenges and particularly shortages of PPE and things like that?
Okay, how strategic this answer will be right now. Yes, of course, all of a sudden, some very, very senior directors in large organisations have become very interested in masks, gloves, sanitizer overnight in order to secure that. So yes, there's been changes and there's been a whole opening up of the market. Everybody is adapting these products and selling them as a new value stream. So we've seen a change in terms of the market being flooded by products. Initially, it was a shortage, then it moved very quickly to being flooded, and then there was a whole quality issues. And yet, obviously, clients really do need to have the have the comfort that we're supplying the right quality of products that do the job they're meant to do, especially in that PP arena, protecting their colleagues and their employees. It's critical. So yes, we've seen a change. We've seen it far. The pace is almost, you can't keep up with it. Luckily, we have a very, because we have a competitive marketplace in each of the categories for our clients, we have a lot of suppliers that we work with that creates that competitive environment. So we were able to keep our clients working, even though we saw obviously different parts of the National Health Service have priority over these PPE. We still were able to supply everybody. We didn't have any shortages, but we certainly saw a lot of interest. We saw a lot of suppliers diversifying. We saw a lot of manufacturers diversifying and producing them. So yes, it's massively changed. It's probably not a great time to do a PPE tender right now. I would suggest that it's probably a better time to sit back, look and think and analyse your data and think about what you're really doing. Take some time to be ready to get back into that as we move forward. So yeah, there's been lots of changes in lots of different areas.
I was just thinking, I have one last question, and it's quite a big one, but I wonder if any of the panel have got any experience or any insights into how AI can support better data management. So whether that be how far you've come at the moment with AI, or how much analysis you can actually automate and make that more efficient process. And does anybody have actually an experience working with that?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it was an experience. It's something that we are investigating at the moment and considering making a fairly significant investment in. And it's on one particular angle. So you think about when one's kind of sourcing relatively low value activity, there's often a whole load of activity that goes off in organizations to understand what it is you're buying, who the potential suppliers may be and what have you. And we've been looking at some tools out there which are using AI to understand what our current supply base is, who the potential suppliers are for these particular items, and then to automate that whole sourcing process. So there's a small number of tools out there doing that, where they're using the AI to learn about what your purchasing patterns are, what your supply base is, and therefore making decisions to automate that whole sourcing process. So I think that's a really interesting angle and something that makes or speeds up the process of procurement quite significantly.
So maybe not experience, but which sort of areas do you think AI actually has the most potential to improve on? Has anyone got quite strong feelings on that?
I think it's right across the operations that we all work in, to be honest. Definitely in procurement, as Jim said, but I'd also think in our transaction processing, in how we procure, everything we do, as long as you've got data, you can use that to make informed decisions and automate quite a lot of transactional processes. So we've certainly explored that area and are exploring and actually using that area, as well as some of the areas that Jim said. We've automated quite a lot in terms of so people can buy much more efficiently. They can ask for a product, see that product, look at the spec of the product, and then it will give them choices, and that's all not having anybody touching it. It's all automated. So, with the information and data, you can drive huge opportunities.
Wonderful. I guess maybe that could be the next big thing we end up talking about. And thank you all so much. It's been really fascinating. I'm sorry if we didn't get to anyone's questions, but there was a lot going on there. It's quite wonderful. Yeah, and I will hand back over to Emma for some closing remarks. Okay, thank you all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kerry. And thank you to our panel of experts as well. There's some really great insights. Yeah, big complex area, lots to go at for procurement. Have we entirely got there? No. Have we got a long way to go? Probably yes. I hope you found that useful and can take away some of those insights to think about how you might tackle it in your organisations. So a massive thank you again to all of our panellists, and to you for submitting your questions as well and trying to make this as interactive as possible. Finally, one massive big thank you to RS. This has been such a great series of seminars, and like I said, we'll be emailing you shortly with the links to all the previous ones if you've missed those, so you can go back and watch them again. The topics were on sustainability, data for today, that will be available to watch on demand, and what the CEO and business leaders really want from procurement, so that there are other 2 more really great seminars that you can watch. So that's it for today. That's it. Thank you for your contribution, and we hope to see you all very soon.